Hi, everyone. It's so great to be here with all of you. I see a lot of familiar faces and some very new faces. And for those who don't know me, as a student, as a seminary student, my husband and I came out here almost like once a month for a while. And so this is really my community for a long while. And I wanted you all to know how much this community has stayed in my heart all this time. I think of you all the time. I bless you. I send you my love, in your ongoing journey in unfolding unity teachings in the world. So what happened to me was that about 6 months before graduation, I was hired at Unity Temple on the Plaza, and boy, when they taught self-care in school and kept reiterating, and I was like, okay already, I had no idea to what extent ministry would consume my entire life. And then the pros and cons of co-ministering with my husband meant we were at home on the couch working together, at 11 o'clock. And so it's been a long time since I've even been able to create some space to come back here. And so I'm very grateful for this opportunity to come back and share both what I've learned and perhaps a little bit of who I am today. It's been an incredibly intense and busy year. And so Victor and I just came back from a trip to Colorado where we went hiking, Garden of the Gods, the Rocky Mountains, and there we were exploring this expansive, amazing scenery. If you haven't been to the Rocky Mountains, it's phenomenal, right? But even then, driving there and passing through Unity Manhattan, we waved and we passed it. We actually did do that, and I'm checking out the scenery and the flat fields with what you might take for granted as these hay, I guess they're not bales because they're not square, but the hay rolls that you see. I mean, amazing images, expansive images as I was driving out, right? And so that's what we had. And if you're anything like me, then nature scenes are a prime way for experiencing peace, right? Like when I'm out there, there's something about that expansiveness of view that perhaps creates an expansiveness in my own being. And I can kind of surrender to that and rest in that peace. And so I'm out there in this peace, right? Hiking, these amazing hikes. And I come back, I open my Facebook, probably not the best idea, but I open Facebook and I find out about what's happened in our nation in the past week. Right, from this place of peace to again, really? That was my reaction. And then just pure fatigue and exhaustion. Like, what are we to do? What are we to do with the amount of violence that seems to be escalating rather than decreasing at this time? But in that place, I actually remembered tapping into the idyllic scenes that I had in that place. I remembered one of the most joyful things in my childhood was being able to visit these beautiful scenes. Now, when I was young, we didn't have a lot of money at all. So our family couldn't afford to take vacations with 5 kids. So I'm not talking about seeing all of these scenes in real life. What we did was jigsaw puzzles. So yeah, in our family, we did jigsaw puzzles all the time. 5 kids, our 2 parents got involved. We did the frame first as you're supposed to, all these things. And we started with, 500-piece puzzles when I was maybe 7. And then as I became like 10 years old, we were working with these 5,000-piece puzzles. It took up our living room and it was amazing. And I actually think about those scenes now because of 2 things. One is, as I reflect on the need for world peace, the need for peace in our neighborhoods, in our nation, and in the world, I thought, I could imagine this idyllic scene, the kind of scene that's on the front, on the lid, of these jigsaw puzzles, right? I could imagine this vision of peace. And then within it, I could remind myself that, if you open the box of world peace, the puzzle pieces aren't these little cardboard things, they're us. They're me. And if I knew that, and I knew that consciousness is what creates our collective reality, then right? I'm taking a look at the puzzle piece of me and going, if a snapshot of my consciousness today were to be put into that bigger puzzle, would it actually contribute to a vision of world peace? For me, the answer is, not quite, right? Better than it used to, but not quite there. So then I felt that sense of empowerment that comes from, wow, I'm a piece of this puzzle. My consciousness dictates what's on this screen, what's manifest. So how can I look at the pieces of my own consciousness and then work on that to do my part in the larger scheme of things? And so I want to talk about that today. I want to talk about it from a unity perspective, because some of us, I was an activist when I was in school, but I was angry when I was in high school, right? So I was coming from this place of wanting to change everybody, fix everybody in the world. From unity, we come from a different consciousness. So the first thing, I want to talk about three aspects, the three pieces that each of us can bring forth into this greater puzzle, right, for world peace. And the first is inner peace, what I would call peace in my heart. And the second is peace in my life. And by that, I mean more like my immediate relationships, my work relationships, my partnership. And then finally, I want to focus on how I can contribute to peace in my community and in the larger world. So these are the three pieces that I want to explore with you here today. So let's start with the first, inner peace. So I know we're going to sing this at the end of today. Almost every Unity church out there sings this song at the end of the service. I'm not going to sing it. Let there be peace on earth, and let it begin with me. I found that some of us, and sometimes I, interpret that to mean, let there be peace on earth, and let it begin with me judging everyone else who isn't as peaceful and loving as I am. Right? I think that's what we kind of do when we look out into the world. We look at some of the politicians of today, maybe all of the politicians of today. I don't know. That's an added commentary that wasn't in my notes here. So we do that. And the reminder is, no, really, let it begin with me in my consciousness. And as was beautifully read by Rochelle in the Daily Word today, which I selected, Charles Fillmore taught that we can all be peacemakers. But here's what he says about what it means to be a peacemaker. A true peacemaker is one who has the ability to say peace to the turbulent waves of thought and have them obey, who reduces to peace and harmony all the thoughts of strife, anger, and retaliation in his own mind. So that's where we begin, right? In our consciousness. And so to that end, I started to think about the fact that even though I'm a Unity minister now, even though I have a regular practice of prayer and meditation, somehow along the way, whether through watching too much news or whatever it was, I started to let in thoughts of accusation and of blame, thoughts and feelings of fear and resentment and anger at a world that simply wouldn't change in the way I thought it should in order for world peace to happen. And so I saw that in me, and I thought, wow, we teach here that what we perceive in our consciousness and believe with our faith, we can achieve in the world what we perceive with our inner eye and believe with our spiritual faith, we can achieve in the world. I was doing nothing with that way of perceiving and seeing in order to achieve peace in the world. Because I was seeing images. That lid on my puzzle box was not a picture of peace. So how was I going to birth more peace in the world? So I started to focus on my consciousness. And there is an inspirational teacher named Dan Zadra who reminds us that worry even is a misuse of our power of imagination. In contrast, the song Victor sang, Imagine, how often do we actually sit down, discipline ourselves to imagine visions and images of peace? Do we do that? Or are we just bombarded by the outer images we see and then reflect that back? Can we hold in our consciousness images of peace? Watch me reconcile with my brother and my sister. See that image of you reconciling with your relatives, with the people at work, with those of different races, those of different occupations, so that we know that blue lives matter, that black lives matter, that all lives matter, right? Let's practice seeing that first in our consciousness. So what's interesting about this is we want to do this in a way that doesn't result in what's known as spiritual bypassing. And I think some of us are afraid to just dwell on these thoughts of peace because they think, well, we're not going to do anything about the violence in the world, and we're not going to take action. But to the contrary, a lot of people have misconstrued this idea of focusing on peace. We can recognize in the material world, in the world of the relative, that there is struggle and conflict that does abide right now. But when we vision peace, we're talking about envisioning again this thing with our inner eye. Recognizing that as we hold it in conscious, we help to give it birth in the world. But we also don't reject, just like we don't reject people in the outer for their anger and their fear. We don't condemn those things in ourselves. Unity's statement of peace says that unity stands for peace in the presence of conflict. It doesn't say we stand for peace only when it's harmonious, right? So that can be applied to our consciousness. So what if you go into the silence, you hold this image of peace, and then out comes this thought of anger, judgment. You can be the presence of peace as you witness that without claiming it as your own, without grabbing onto it and holding on to it. You can simply be with it as a presence of love and of peace. That's what it means to be peace in the midst, in the presence of conflict, not just in the world, but in our own hearts. So inner peace. So we know that that is the foundational practice that unity teaches. It's what the third or fourth unity principle, to practice prayer and meditation, to work on our consciousness. But I'm a firm believer in the idea that prayer is just the beginning. It's said that prayer is like the partner to action. And so our next step is to look at what are the fruits of that consciousness in the world. Let's look in our immediate surroundings. Let's look at you and me and how we treat each other. And so next I want to talk about that relationship we have with those in our proximity. And so as background on this topic, I've had to study this topic hard because in my family of origin, while I can say that there was not a lot of outward fighting, I don't think my parents ever yelled at each other. But there was a tremendous amount of judgment. It hung like tangibly in the air, such that when I walked out into the room after getting dressed in the morning, my mom wouldn't have to say anything to me. She would just scan me up and down, and I would walk back and go get changed again, feeling inadequate in how I looked. There was that general sense in my family, and I know now, I didn't know then that there was a good intention behind that. She thought, oh, if I critique my child, then she will improve herself to be successful in the world, and then she will be happy. She thought that. But judgment was so pervasive in my family. And I didn't know until I learned later through studying Marshall Rosenberg and his work on nonviolent communication, which I know some of you are well versed in here, that judgment is actually a violent act. So this premier teacher, peacemaker in the world, who's won numerous awards for peacemaking in the world, whom I actually just recently found out won Unity's the Light of God Expressing Award in 2005, Marshall Rosenberg did, that he strongly believed that judgment itself was a violent act. And he says this, that when we judge others, we contribute to violence. So I want to say a little bit about judgment and communication, because a lot of times when people first hear about nonviolent communication, they're like, well, communication's one thing, but we're talking about people killing each other in the world, right? So the thing is, Marshall Rosenberg actually worked in war-torn countries. I have a whole list of countries here: Rwanda, Nigeria, Malaysia, Indonesia, Sri Lanka, Northern Ireland, Colombia, Croatia, the Middle East. He worked in all these countries to promote peace in action through peaceful communication. So there's a great amount of power in the way that we hold in consciousness the other and the way that we communicate with the other. So I was reminded of this, and in that I started to question things I was doing even this week, even with my husband, because I know I've done a lot of work in not having this judgmental mentality, not having violent ways of speaking. But I was reminded this week, because I brought the book on the trip with me, I was reminded of the idea that even questions can be violent. That a truly peaceful question is one that is curious about the answer. A true question that's nonviolent isn't a question like this: is that how you always wash the dishes? That's not a question. I'm learning. That's a judgment, right? So we need to be mindful of the ways in which we interact with one another that contribute to violence in the world, that add to violence in that other person's heart, I'm sure too, hearing that, right? So that's the second piece. Our hearts, our consciousness, then how we express that to others in the world that are proximately related to us. And then finally, how do I take a larger step and increase peace in the larger community? So with this, I have much more to share. I want to recall again the daily word for today. The affirmation is, I envision all people as citizens of peace. I envision all people as citizens of peace. Do I really? Do I really? If I'm honest, then that's not true. So how can I make what I know to be a truth statement, a unity truth statement, to be true in my heart and my life? That same passage ends, I see all people as children of God. Do I really? And it's not about the people I already see as beautiful children of God. It's the people I don't that I need to work on, right? In terms of my own consciousness. So when I returned from the trip and got back on social media, I do a lot of my ministry there. And I found myself reviewing all these posts about what had happened this past week, right? And I'm liking this and affirming that and doing all these wonderful posts because I've got a lot of Unity friends, ministers. And so there are all these posts about acting nonviolently, about how oneness should prevail and all these, and I'm loving the posts. And in the midst of it, I realize, oh my God, I'm still part of the problem. Because if I am only focused on agreeing with those with whom I already agree, with just looking for statements out there that affirm what I already know and believe, I'm part of the problem because I'm not looking to understand the other side. If I'm at all thinking about the other side, I can't believe that someone could think like that. I can't understand how someone would think like that. Then I'm part of the problem. Because if that side's saying the same thing, I'm saying the same thing, we're stuck. But if I can start to look at some of the viewpoints that are different from my own, I don't necessarily have to agree with them, but I'm trying to understand what's behind them. I'm trying to feel into what's behind them. So I had all these thoughts, and then as a minister, I tend towards communicating my thoughts. And so I posted this idea on Facebook, and I got some likes and this and that, and then someone shared that he totally agreed with me, but then went on this rant under my post, and then under his rant, another woman came in and started sharing a different view. And then he replied, and then she replied, and then he replied. Before I knew it, there were about 25 responses where they were going at each other a little bit under my post. And there was a part of me that's like, should I delete this? What's going on here? And then I decided I was actually going to pray and center in peace about this and allow each person to really share what was on their hearts. It felt a little bit violent to me. It felt a little aggressive to me. But I held the space of peace for the both of them. And in the midst of that, something happens. The woman, out of the blue it seemed, decided she wasn't going to just share her position. She was going to share about herself. And then she had this extremely vulnerable share about where she was just today, that day. And how, she was looking for a job and doing this, but this issue from the week tormented her so much. She felt like she needed to say something, and she knew she was imperfect in her conclusions and still uncertain about them, but she just felt a need to speak her voice about it. And in the midst of that, his next reply was, "Oh, you do art? This is fantastic." He started commending her for her efforts. And then there was this love fest on my Facebook page. And it was this beautiful moment where I was reminded of something else that Marshall Rosenberg teaches, which is that vulnerability can be a path to peace. That in the midst of even positional differences, we can connect with love with one another, not necessarily agreeing with one another, but that's how we hold diversity. That's what it means when we say there's oneness, but there are individual expressions of that oneness. So I was thrilled to see this happen on my page, where we created safe space for these people to express views that were definitely different from my own. So, consciousness within and without. I also wanted to share that I have felt called personally to take action in the world. And a lot of times in Unity, this idea can be confused, where people think, oh, taking peaceful action means not making waves, right? We just want to make everything harmonious in Unity. But I want to say that right and peaceful action comes from a peaceful heart guided by our innate wisdom. But in a world where the current is a current of violence, being a peaceful actor can mean going against that current, right? It's just that we do it with a heart filled with peace rather than with antagonism and hate. But that doesn't mean that we have to go with the current of the popular world's beliefs. And so, those are the things that have been on my heart and mind this week to share. For me, this last action step means that I reached out to our local organization in Kansas City called Communities Creating Opportunity. And I thought, I want to do some work creating greater social equity. I also invited someone to bring in some inclusion training in our community. I thought, that's another affirmative step that I could take in the world beyond my own consciousness, to bring about forums for being together peacefully in a safe environment with different views, with people from different races, people with different politics, So those are some of my efforts this week. So I just want to conclude by sharing a quote from the Talmud, actually, which is the rabbinic Judaic text, primary rabbinic Judaic text. And it says this about peace in the world, or about our efforts. And it spoke to me when I was feeling overwhelmed. Do not be daunted by the enormity of the world's grief. Do justly now. Love mercy now. Walk humbly now. You are not obligated to complete the work, but neither are you free to abandon it. Right? Ours may not be the entire puzzle, but just a piece. But it is ours to take up that piece, work on it, clean it up a little, beautify it, make it a peaceful scene that we could add to the world's vision of peace. And with that, I invite us to begin, as we always do in unity, in consciousness. So I'll invite Victor to sing a song for us, and then I'll lead us into a time of meditation.
Well, I am holding the vision, 'cause I'm holding on to it, friends, with an open mind. And I am holding my blessings, 'cause I'm holding every single one of them with an open hand. Every joy and every fear, every smile and every tear, brings us closer to our truth, brings us closer to our light. And I am holding my lessons, yes, I'm holding each and every one of them with an open heart. And I am holding my neighbor, yes, holding each and every one of you in my soul. And every joy and every fear, every smile and every tear brings us closer to our truth, brings us closer to our light. And I am holding the vision.
And as we prepare now for a time in the silence, I invite you to close your eyes if you haven't already done so. Take a deep breath and hold it for just a few seconds before slowly letting it out. And I invite you to make my words your words as we affirm this together. I envision all people as citizens of peace, and I dedicate myself to being a peacemaker. When I experience strife or anger, I determine the cause and take positive steps to promote healing and resolution. I contribute to world peace by living peacefully and beholding all people as capable of promoting peace. I am peace. I am a willing peacemaker in this world. I begin with me as I center in the peace that rests at the very depths and core of my own being, here now in the silence. And as you bring your attention gently back into the space of this room, I invite you to remember that peace is the very core and essence of your being. And peace is the core and essence of all whom you meet. And so it is. And amen.